From 1930 to 1952, the government of the Soviet Union, on the orders of Joseph Stalin and under the direct leadership of Lavrentiy Beria, forcibly resettled millions of people. Starting with the dispossession and deportation of the social class of Cossacks and Kazakhs in the 1930s, during the war years. Deported nation. One of the first to be forcibly deported were the Far Eastern Koreans. In 1939 to 1941, deported Poles from Western Belarus and Western Ukraine, as well as from the Baltic republics, became residents of the Republic. With the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, a new stage in the deportation of peoples began. They were Soviet Germans. The Germans were the largest national group of all the listed nations, and their fate from that moment on differs in many respects from the fate of other peoples. To the Republic, out of 472,174 Germans planned for resettlement. Reasons. The circumstances that caused it were the establishment of a totalitarian system in the Soviet Union, its aggressive actions at the beginning of the Second World War. In the 40s, he conquered the territory of the Baltic states, Western Ukraine, Western Belarus, the right bank of Moldavia, and northern Bukovina, and started a campaign to collectivize agriculture. This measure was followed by forced relocation of Kazakhs and tens of thousands of peasants. Public issues. In the resettled areas, the settlers faced many difficulties. Most of the specially resettled people were in need of food, clothing, daily necessities and shelter for a long time. In a letter received from South Kazakhstan, he wrote, "Accommodation of displaced persons is causing great difficulties. The housing stock does not meet the needs of displaced persons. In many districts, it was not possible to provide employment to displaced persons. Although displaced people were recruited to teach in schools, most of them did not know the language, and limited themselves to teaching displaced children. Epidemic diseases were not eradicated due to the impossibility of adequate medical and sanitary care." Adaptation of peoples after deportation. The employment of specially resettled people was carried out at a good level in Almaty region. 96.4% of them were employed, 85.4% in Kostanay region, 80.2% in Karaganda region, and 79.6% in Akmola region. Conclusion. The deportation of entire peoples during the Great Patriotic War contributed to social and political tensions in the Republic and created economic, ideological, political. The deported people made a huge contribution to the history and culture of the ancient Kazakh land. Often the deportees intermarried with the locals. Many descendants of these unions still live in the territory of Kazakhstan today. We conducted a survey among people on the topic deportation of nations. To the question about the number of nations living in Kazakhstan, most of the people answered that there were 130 nations, which is correct. To the second question about the impact of deported nations, people were mostly neutral. To the question about the region with the most deported nation, 42.9% of people answered that they live in central Kazakhstan, which is correct. The next question was, which nation was the most deported to Kazakhstan? Answers: Germans and Uzbeks got the same percentage, 30.8%. And the correct answer is Germans. And to the last is question, how do you feel about the deportation of people during the Soviet era? 60% of people answered that they were negative that people were deported to the Kazakhstan.